The Bigger Man. Seth shows Lars around. Seth rocked slowly, alone on the big deck. His rocking chair creaked and a dry breeze swayed the ocean of weeds in the yard. Sadness weighed on Seth's eyes, and his gangly hand held his heavy head. His knobby elbow rested on the hard wooden arm of the rocking chair. "Hey there, guy!" A confident, colorful voice rained down on Seth from above. Seth lifted his eyes to the man standing beside him and tried to gain his bearings. "My name's Lars," the man said. He wore an old black leather jacket over a thin wife-beater. A tattoo of some sort of creature peeked out of his shirt, scratching at his chest. His hands were in his jacket pockets, and a flimsy blue duffel bag hung over his shoulder. "You live here?" Lars asked. Seth sat up, looked the man up and down, looked out at the street that he came in on, and then looked back up at him. He said a hesitant, "Yeah? I'm gonna be living with you guys. This is my new home." Lars flashed a large smile. Seth raised an eyebrow. His mouth hung open, saliva brimming at the corners of his lips like usual. He didn't say anything. "This is the low-income housing place, right?" Lars asked. Seth looked up at him silently. "Okay," Lars said. "What's your name, little man?" Seth looked at the man's duffel bag. Then he looked at his black leather biker boots. Then his tattoo. He was still staring at the tattoo when he slowly said, "Seth. Seth Christian Anders." So Christian's your middle name, huh? Some pretty big shoes to fill, I'd say," Lars indeed said, and then winked at him. Seth looked down at his own big Walmart shoes that weren't quite filled with his normal-sized feet. "I'm just saying it would be pretty, dull having to be a Christian these days." He waited for Seth to get it. Lars cleared his throat and started again. "You're a funny little man." Lars looked into the windows. "What's the deal with this place? Who else lives here?" Seth looked up at him. "I'm not a Christian. I'm a Catholic." "Okay." Lars was entertained. "So, you want to be a friend and show me around?" Seth perked up a little bit. "You want me to be your friend? Seth shook his head. You want me to show you around?" "Yeah, little man, is that possible?" Lars smiled to himself, but in the direction of Seth, becoming more confident Seth didn't know the difference. The realization of having a new friend took a moment to sink in. Then Seth's excitement pulled him forward, and he hopped out of the rocking chair. Yeah, sure." He cleared his throat. Glancing down at his oversized polo shirt, he saw the food stain under his collar and tried to rub it off. But thinking it would look less obvious, he resorted to just holding his chin over it. Seth pulled his shoulders back and looked out over the front yard. Trying to look natural, but speaking in his tough voice, he said, "So, yeah, this is our house. He looked at Lars's face to see how he was doing. Lars smiled, so Seth continued, "This is the yard here. That's our fence. That's our other fence. These are our rocking chairs. He turned around and looked at the house. He looked at the address numbers next to the door, halfway hidden behind a stack of phone books resting against the house. Its address is 606 Broadway. "What's with the oxygen bottles and the phone books, brother?" Seth looked down at the crate of oxygen bottles, all in different stages of falling over, which were stacked against the wall of phone books. "Miss Muffin's this old lady," he said, "that lives here. You know her?" Seth glanced up and saw that of course Lars didn't. "Oh yeah, of course not. Well, she leaves her oxygen bottles out here to get picked up and stuff." Lars leaned down, partly to hide his humored smile, examined the plastic strip around the nozzles, and said, more sober now, "It looks like some of these are fully pressurized still. Seems like kind of a hazard out here in the elements." Seth didn't hear him and continued, "These are the phone books." He read the title on the top one. "The Yellow Pages, in fact. They've been here for forever." He went over and adjusted one of the stacks against the wall. They began to fall, and he scrambled to put them back in place. Lars opened the screen door, but Seth butted in front of him and opened the bigger door wider. "This is the inside of the house," Seth said, his arms motioning as if it were a showcase in some game show. He thought he was doing a good job of looking cool. The stairs thumped and creaked as Nayeli came hopping down them. She walked quickly down the cement hall with her arms crossed and head low. Her baseball cap sat low on her head, and she almost ran into Seth and Lars. Lars smiled widely at her and stood in the doorway, which he could tell she meant to pass through. "Hello there," he smiled down at her. She looked up at him from under her ball cap. "I'm Lars." He held out his left hand. Nayeli offered her left hand, hiding her right one behind her back. Seth saw a band-aid around the index finger of the hidden hand. Lars took her fingers in the way of an English gentleman and bowed slightly. "It's nice to meet you." She smiled slightly and without thinking said, "Un gusto." She shook her head and stuttered to find the right English words. Lars said, "I speak a little bit of Spanish. Mucho gusto. You seem kind of nervous, my dear." He said this with a challenge in his smile. She looked at him, confused. He tried again. "You look nervous. Nervoso. You know, embarrassed. Embarazado." He smiled charmingly and winked at her. A look of horror crossed her face at the last word. She looked down at her thin waist and curvaceous hips to see if she indeed did look pregnant. She pulled her pants up to cover her tiny tummy, which ripped the band-aid halfway off her finger. Nayeli then flashed a look of hatred at Lars, pushed her way through the door, and stomped down the steps. As she walked away down the sidewalk, she held her injured finger in front of her, picking at it obsessively. "What's wrong with her, little man?" He admired the full curves of her body, bouncing beneath her tight jeans and t-shirt. The wind furled and unfurled her glossy black hair. "Pfft, I don't know," Seth said, glad to have Lars's attention back. "She does stuff like that sometimes, but she also cooks lots of food and leaves it in the refrigerator. You can have some if you want." "Really? That's interesting. I have a keen interest in food myself. I'm working on starting a restaurant." Seth walked into the living room, not listening to Lars. "This is our house. That's our Christmas tree from a couple years ago. That's our TV. It only gets 2 channels, and they're totally lame, and the sound's messed up. There's our fireplace. That's our couch. It's kind of really old." "Psst!" A whisper came from the kitchen. The tip of an oxygen bottle stuck out from behind the kitchen doorway. "Psst!" Seth walked into the kitchen and looked at Miss Muffin hiding round the corner. She shook her head at him. Seth looked confused. Miss Muffin gestured by pointing her thumb toward the other room. She whispered, "Him. He's not good. He's not good at all. Very bad." Seth looked back at Lars, who stood in the middle of the room, waiting for him, his legs spread slightly, hands in his pockets. The duffel bag started to slip from his right shoulder, but instead of scooting it up with his shoulder, he reached over with his left hand and tugged it back into place. Something was weird about his right arm. "Anyway," Seth stepped back into the room and spoke to Lars. He gestured to Miss Muffin behind the wall and whispered, "She's kind of crazy." Lars said out loud, "I don't mind crazy people. You seem kind of crazy yourself, little man." He smiled at Seth. Seth raised his eyebrows questioningly. His hands hung awkwardly at his sides. "Hey, don't worry about it, little man." Lars leaned in and slapped him lightly on his thin shoulder. "What else is in this house? Show me the backyard." He could see it through the kitchen. Seth walked him through the kitchen. Lars smiled at Miss Muffin, who made a cross with her 2 index fingers in front of her face. Only her eyes followed him. Seth went down a couple steps into the sunny laundry room. Lars whispered, "Now that's a woman who might be better off just taking her whole bottle of pills." Lars laughed. Seth looked up at him, confused. Lars saw his confusion and responded, "I'm just saying, she might be happier dead. I mean, if you can't enjoy life, why stick around?" He slapped Seth on the shoulder and winked at him with both eyes and a smile. "Oh," Seth thought hard. "You mean all the medicine in the bottle would be enough to kill someone if they wanted to?" "Okay." He continued digesting the thought. Lars looked around the laundry room. "Oh, good. You have a washer and dryer. Righteous." Seth stopped and turned around. He looked at Lars and then at the washer and dryer. The sun shone through the trees outside, through the greenhouse-like windows. It speckled everything in the room, including Seth's shoulders and balding head. "Yeah, this is the laundry room. Here's our washer and dryer, and here's our counter to fold your clothes on." The dryer rumbled quietly, and a pair of Nayeli's gold leggings hung over the counter to dry. Seth forced open the old wooden door with peeling green paint grating over the small cement back porch. "This is our backyard." A gigantic oak tree grew out of the middle of the yard. "That's our fence. That's the alley back there." Seth stepped into the yard, walked around the side of the house, and pointed. "That's our storm shelter cellar place." "Whoa, wait! There's a storm shelter under there?" Lars looked at the large mound of degenerating household items piled against the house. garden hoses, old bicycles, folded-up tables, an old kiddie pool, a stack of buckets, a broom, an old mattress. It looked like a multi-family garage sale had been swept against the side of the house. "Yeah," Seth said. "One of the rules is to keep the storm shelter, he shook his head in frustration. Storm shelter thingy clean." "Rules? There are rules?" "Oh yeah, there's a plaque in the entryway that says all the rules. We're all supposed to take care of the house. I'll show you." Seth slipped by him through the yard and back into the house. They walked through the kitchen. Miss Muffin had escaped to her room, through the TV room, and to the front door. Seth closed the front door, and, hanging on the wall behind it, they found an old wooden plaque with words etched down the front. "Whoa, it looks like someone spent some time on this. Who made it?" "I think the landlord did." Seth's eyebrows furrowed. "Oh yeah? Where's the landlord?" "I don't know." Lars raised his eyebrows and waited for more of an answer, but it didn't come. So he continued. "This social worker lady said the landlord here had specifically requested I live in this house, and she said he's here a lot. I'd like to meet him." "I don't think I've ever met him," Seth said, and shrugged. "He never comes around?" Seth shrugged again. Lars continued. "Then how does he enforce the rules and stuff?" Seth shrugged again. "Do you even know how you got here?" Lars corrected his degrading tone by saying, how'd you get here and stuff, brother?" "Well," Seth swallowed, "this one lady said this one guy said I could live in his house after my mom went into the old folks' home, and she gave me his phone number and I could call any time." "Yeah, that lady must have been your social worker, and that guy was the landlord." Lars pulled the strap of his duffel bag higher onto his shoulder, and ran his hand through his shiny black hair, using the same hand. "So how do you guys pay rent and stuff?" "According to the rules," Seth scanned the list and found the bottom one, "we're supposed to pay what we can." Then Seth pointed to the slotted drop box underneath the plaque. "But I don't think anybody does because," he tried to peer into the slot, "because the landlord never comes around to check it, I don't think." "Oh yeah?" Lars's eyes wandered, and he looked down the dirty cement hallway. He sized up the first dented, handleless wooden door that happened to be Seth's, and then the fraying doorbell wires by Miss Muffin's door next to his. Her door was slightly better than Seth's. He spotted Miss Muffin peering out at him. Her face disappeared as the door slammed. "So, just curious," he avoided eye contact with Seth, "how do you guys determine who gets which room?" Seth looked down the hallway at the doors. "Well, John and Leanne, they have the biggest room upstairs. He has a good job. He's a manager at McDonald's, and has a wife. She's really beautiful. I think that's why they get the best room, because they're the best people." Lars hid his entertained smirk. "What about the rest of you guys?" Seth looked at the split in his hollow wooden door and the reflective 00 address stickers on it. He humbly said, "I think we just kind of figure out who deserves what." The sound of clicking toenails trotted down the hall above them, and the dog came down the stairs. She continued down the cement hall and trotted past them, headed for the kitchen. Seth said, "That's Barry, the dog. I don't know her real name, but that's what we call her because she buries everything." Lars laughed. "Okay, Barry the pug dog. All right. So what's upstairs?" Seth and Lars climbed the dirty, carpeted stairs and stood at the top. Bright light poured in through the windows at the end of the hall, illuminating the white plaster walls. "This is Nayeli's room." Seth pointed to an oak door on the left with a cheap plastic yellow flower tucked into the rim of the spyglass. He pointed to the next door on that wall. "And here's the nice bathroom." He pointed across the hall on the right side. "And this is John and Leanne's room. They have the biggest room, and they have a walk-in closet." Then Seth whispered, "Everybody wants that room, but they're pretty much the coolest people in the house, so they get it." They walked to the end of the hall into the common space. John sat in a chair with his feet up on a windowsill, reading a book. "Oh, this is John," Seth said. "He's the cool one." John stood up. He set down his book and straightened his Hawaiian shirt around his slightly thicker midsection. He offered his hand. "Hi." John had short black hair and a neatly trimmed goatee. Lars deftly grabbed his own right hand with his left and lifted it to shake hands. "I'm Lars. I'm moving in." "Oh, yeah?" John raised a surprised eyebrow. He also tried to hide that he was taken aback by Lars's strangely lifeless right arm. Lars continued. The lady assigned me to this house. She said the landlord would be around to talk to. Social worker? Yeah, something like that, Lars said. Is the landlord going to be here anytime soon? No, not that we're aware of. We've never seen him, John shrugged at Seth. We kind of just take care of ourselves here. A prolonged silence arrived, and they all looked awkwardly around the room. So, what do you do, Lars? Do you work? Oh, I just run my own business, Lars said. There's very high demand for my product right now. Clients banging down my door practically. Oh yeah? John asked. May I ask, what do you sell? Frozen foods, actually. I do the marketing and sourcing. I orchestrate all the deliveries. I have to do the financing and basically have to work lots of hours to make sure people are covered, you know? Really? John, wary of the egotism, was yet intrigued. So, you have been doing it a long time? I delivered my first shipment 10 years ago. Lars pushed a lock of hair back with his hand. It basically took off like wildfire from there. Does the wildfire melt all your frozen foods? John smirked at his clever joke until he realized it was dumb. He regained his composure and said, Well, I'm a manager at McDonald's, just 20 or so employees, and I just got done for the day, so... Lars interrupted with, That's cool, man. Gotta start somewhere. John continued, Well, I only went to a couple years of college before I was drafted to the Army, but I'm a pretty quick learner if you have any tips on how to run a business better. You bet, John. I am at your service. I mean, when I'm not working, of course. I have to work a lot of weekends. But wait a second, John said. How'd you get stuck in this house with a job like that? Well, that's a good question, because I usually wouldn't have to live in a place like this, you know? He ran his fingers through his hair and checked for dandruff. Some of his black locks had fallen out of his ponytail. He spoke deliberately, emphasizing with his hand as if he was teaching John a deep business principle. You see, sometimes it's important to step out of your environment and get into one that's a little bit uncomfortable, to really get back down to reality, to get some fresh ideas. I like to see how the little people do things, like, I'm sure if I looked in your freezer, for example, I'd learn something about how you guys keep frozen food. Anyway, suffice it to say, I looked up a social worker who knew of good places to stay, and she said this place is as inspirational and interesting as any, and I can already tell she is right. John nodded and almost reached to shake Lars's hand again, but stopped when he remembered it was lame. Well, it's an honor to have you in our house. I assume the landlord, or your worker, figured out a room for you or a bed to stay in somewhere. We always seem to have enough of everything in this house. Food and toilet paper and all that stuff. Somehow there's always enough. Thanks, John. I'm privileged that you guys will have me. He bowed slightly. Oh, and nice tattoo, by the way. John glanced at Lars's chest through his open jacket and under his wife-beater. A fighting bumblebee, I guess, right? That's cool. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, or something like that, right? He made mock jabs in the air. No, man. Lars looked down indignantly and pulled the strap of his wife-beater aside. It's a dragon, bro. Those are like his scales and stuff. Oh. John leaned closer, but felt uncomfortable looking at Lars's chest very long. I see it now, I guess. Yeah, right there, okay. He pointed vaguely at the tattoo. There was a pause. John looked down by Lars's feet. So you've met Barry? Lars looked down at the dog arriving behind him, panting and happy. Lars nodded. John smiled and said, She's a good dog. Pug dog and beagle mix, we think. Poor thing has allergies, though, and she's always on a mission to find something new to Barry. Anyway, welcome to the house. My wife Leanne will be coming home from work soon. She's in retail, and I'm sure she'd like to meet you too. Lars nodded and winked both eyes. He and Seth turned to go back down the stairs. Lars stopped at the bathroom and told Seth, I'll meet you downstairs, my friend. Seth walked down the stairs, letting Lars's words soak in. A smile grew on his face and his chin rose. He whispered proudly to himself, My friend. He reached the bottom of the stairs and walked down the cement hallway without looking at the dirty walls or doors. Then he turned the corner at the end of the hallway and stopped by the front door. Leaning against the corner, he put a hand on his hip and crossed a leg in front of the other. He looked down to make sure he looked cool. Seth's eyes drifted across the living room, an entryway to his left, past the bathroom doorway covered by a shower curtain on his right, and eventually came to rest on the wall in front of him. He glanced up the stairs and then down at himself. He stood up straight and scrubbed at the stain under his collar until he got frustrated and stopped. Eventually, he covered it with his hand and did his best to brush it off mentally. Leaning against the corner again, he put his hand in his pocket like Lars had done, crossed his legs, and then, slowly and seriously, read the rules to seem busy while he waited. Rules for living at 606 Broadway. 1. Respect the landlord. 2. Take care of each other. 3. Keep exterior of house clean and trim. 4. Keep interior of house clean and orderly. 5. Keep storm shelter clean from debris inside and out. And 6. Pay what you can pay for rent. Suddenly the walls roared with the sound of rushing water. Something slammed into a wall upstairs. Seth scrambled and jumped onto the couch in the TV room, lifting his legs from the floor. Mice and cockroaches poured from the walls and scrambled aimlessly around the room. A minute after the melee on the floor disappeared, Seth heard Lars coming down the stairs. Seth quickly stepped down from the couch and leaned his shoulder against the wall with one hand in his pocket and the other propped on his hip. He crossed a leg, glanced down at himself quickly, and waited for Lars. When Lars came around the corner, Seth told him with his tough voice, "I forgot to tell you about the toilet up there. You have to turn the faucet and the bathtub on full blast before you flush. One of the people who used to live here installed a really powerful toilet because they wanted more power, but the house wasn't made for it, or something." He forced the last words out of his empty lungs. Lars responded, "The toilet startled me, but I think it startled the dog more. First he burst into the bathroom while I'm standing there doing my thing, like he's waiting his turn. We need to get a new handle on that door, by the way. And then when I flushed, he ran straight into the door with all his might. I had closed it behind him, but it didn't even faze him. I opened it up, and he darted out as fast as he could." Just then, Barry trotted down the stairs with a mouse tail hanging out of her mouth. She continued past them and toward the doggy door, her curly tail wagging the whole way.